everyone and welcome back. My name is Katie and today I wanted to talk about how I have tripled the amount of books I have read this year as compared to last year. This time last year I think I'd read 28 books, whereas today I finished my 90th book of 2020. Since 2013 I've been an avid reader and each year I had set the goal of reading 50 books. I think I only ever achieved that once. This year though, I've smashed that. And so I've been thinking this week about how I actually managed to achieve that. And I wanted to share with you the 5 kind of tips, I guess, that have really changed my reading behavior and have enabled me to read so much more this year. Before I get into the list though, of course, I do have to acknowledge that 2020 is a little bit different to last year. A lot is different about 2020 and everybody is experiencing this year very differently depending on their own circumstances. And given that I work in a bookshop and so I haven't actually been at work a lot this year, certainly in the last 6 months, I do think that has played in. It is a factor into how much time I've had to read. But my problem in the past has never been that I don't have enough time to read. My problem in the past has actually been like the motivation and momentum. So with that kind of caveat out of the way, let's get into my 5 tips for reading more and what has worked for me this year. Tip number 1, start your day with reading. Now I know mornings are different for everybody depending on their own circumstances, but for me, I have found it like transformative to start my day with reading. Whether that's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, it doesn't really matter. The point is though to kind of set yourself up right and to set up reading as an important part of your day. I have found personally that when I start the day with reading, it feels great in and of itself just to know that I've done a bit of reading that day. And so if my day does end up being super busy and I don't get another opportunity, I still feel like I've made some progress. However, what I've noticed more than that is that when I start my day by reading, it sort of sets me up. It's sort of like it signals to me that reading is a priority and it sort of gets like the momentum going. And so throughout the day, when I have 15 minutes, half an hour to spare, where I might normally go to Instagram or something because I don't really have enough time to read, because I've started my day off reading, I'm invested in the story, I've sort of got that flow going, I find that I'm willing to pick up a book even if I've only got 15 minutes to spare. So starting my day off that way, it's almost like it establishes to my subconscious that this is a thing we do when we have a bit of spare time. It's sort of like it signals to me in some way that reading is a part of my day and that I'm going to incorporate it throughout the day, that I don't have to wait until, I have like a perfect hour or 2 set aside in the evening where I won't be disturbed. Instead, it's just something that I incorporate. And I just find how I choose to spend my morning definitely sets the tone for how I choose to spend the rest of my day. And in particular, how I choose to spend moments of downtime. Number 2 is accountability and tracking. Now, I am somebody who loves to read, but I'm also like top tier procrastinator. I'm very good at telling myself that I will do something, but I'll do it tomorrow. But when I get to tomorrow, it becomes the next day or the day after. It's very easy for me to just like not read and not realize that I've been 3, 4, 5, 6 days without reading. And so what I found is having some level of accountability and tracking can really help with sort of, I guess, making me feel like I have a little bit of a time pressure to where I prioritize reading today rather than waiting for tomorrow. And this accountability tracking stuff are things that people always talk about with any kind of goals, I think. But I do think it's really important to sort of have a bit of a reflection moment and consider what sort of person you are. For me, I know that kind of like high pressure accountability can just almost make me avoid things more. I can get very overwhelmed very quickly if I feel like there's too much expectation. So I need to be cautious of having some kind of pressure there to keep me motivated, to keep me moving without overwhelming myself. Some of the things that I have found very helpful this year is number 1, GoodReads. I've had a GoodReads account for years, but this year is the first that I've kind of like consistently kept up with it. And it actually has quite like a social media sort of interactive component to it that I never appreciated before. But it is really nice, like when you sign off having finished another book, having a few people like it, a bit of validation. It's nice. I think my favorite thing about GoodReads in terms of like that sense of accountability though is the reading challenge. So at the beginning of the year, you can let GoodReads know how many books you would like to read for the year. And as you input books that you finish throughout the year, you kind of get like this bar progress thing that is super motivating to me. I especially love how it lets you know like how many books over or under your goal you are. The other thing that I can't deny I think has had a big impact is just being active on BookTube. Obviously I've set up the intention that I want to do a reading wrap up each month, and in order to do so I have to kind of read a decent amount of books. Sort of reassessing mid-month or towards the end of the month if I've really been reading as much as I thought I was reading or as much as I want to be reading. I've also been using a new app lately, and that is called Bookly. Now, there are a lot of different features in this app, and you can have like the free or the paid version. Primarily though, what I use it for is just the reading session timing. Basically, you can input the book that you're reading, and when you sit down for a reading session, you press, that you're reading, and it times you, and then you press when you're finished, and you can put in what page you got up to. And so I think that's really cool, just kind of getting some stats about like how many pages per hour you're reading, like your reading speed. It'll also let you know like how long you have left to read if you continue at the speed you're currently reading. So those sort of stats are really fun. But more to the point, when I sit down and I press that start button, it really keeps me focused. When I have those little moments of like, oh, I could just check Instagram or something, even though I would only do that for a few minutes, that's still really stalling the reading process. And more often than not, let's be real, those couple of minutes on Instagram turn into 20 minutes. Whereas when I have the timer on and it's timing me, it's a much easier to sort of be like, no, we're reading right now. We're not going over to Instagram, we're reading. Stay focused. Additionally, this tracking has actually been quite useful in kind of getting to know and better understand my own behaviors as a reader and some sort of patterns that I've noticed. So for example, I noticed that even if I have all the time in the world, I very often find myself sort of pressing pause or stop on a reading session at about the 55 to 60 minute mark. And it seems like that after about an hour, I just fatigue a little bit, and like my body and my mind just wants to have a little bit of a break, whether I get up and go for a little bit of a walk, or I go make myself a cup of tea, whatever it is. So I've started using this knowledge to my advantage, especially on days where I really am trying to read quite a bit. So now that I know that my sort of limit's about an hour, at the 50-minute mark maybe, I might switch to read a different book. Or maybe I'll get up and go sit on the balcony instead of the couch. Just a small switch up to kind of reset and delay the fatigue a little bit. That has enabled me to read more and to read longer. The other sort of time pressure accountability things that I found very helpful are like book clubs. So things where you sort of have to read something by a certain time, and also subscription services. So for me, I run my own book club over on my Patreon, where we read a book every month. And so I sort of, as the leader and runner of that book club, there is an expectation that come the end of the month, come our live chat, I've read the book. And then as far as subscription services, I am subscribed to the Wild Book Box, which is a secondhand book subscription service. And each month I get 3 secondhand books in the mail. And so that is 3 books that I want to get through before my next box shows up. So those are some of the main ways that I found having some level of accountability, tracking, sort of, I guess, a bit of time pressure has helped me prioritize reading and stay focused when I am reading. Number 3 is to mix it up. And I think this might be the biggest thing that has changed for me and has had the biggest impact on the volume of reading I've been able to do this year. And this is all about being conscious and deliberate about having a lot of variety and diversity in my reading. And I mean this in as many ways as possible. So some of the things I will consider when I'm choosing books to read will be like the genre and style and the complexity and length of a book. And I will try to mix those up as much as possible. So a few years ago, I really just read nonfiction. And as much as I love nonfiction and I will continue to read nonfiction, for me, it definitely does kind of take up a certain amount of mental space that not all fiction does. And so that's a little bit slower for me to read. And also I find that I can really only read one at a time. So now I really prioritize reading that nonfiction when I want to, but also incorporating plenty of fiction, as well as things like short stories, manga, and poetry. And I find reading things that are different and sort of like reading different things that engage my reading mind in a slightly different way enables me to sort of stay engaged and focused on reading, and also just keeps that interest up that I can maintain momentum with. The other thing I try to do is make sure that I'm reading lots of different formats. So obviously I love a good physical book as much as the next reader, but this year I have been reading more ebooks, especially for short stories and novellas. I love a good ebook. But audiobooks is something I've really embraced this year, and it has definitely enabled me to read a lot more. Because obviously you can listen to audiobooks while you're doing other things. But also, I find that sometimes my eyes just get a bit tired, or my mind's just not quite being able to focus on a page. In those moments, I can still be reading by listening. And I think this has been a big part of why I've been able to read so much more this year. Where I used to maybe listen to 4 audiobooks a year, I'm now more listening to like 3 or 4 a month. The other consideration I have, and something that I try to find a good balance between, is comfort and novelty. So that is a good balance between reading things that I know I probably will like, stuff that I'm really comfortable reading, and balancing that with stuff that is a little bit out of my comfort zone, covers topics that I'm not really familiar with. Reading comfort things can kind of, I think, be quite easy a lot of the time. I can get through those things quite quickly. Reading things that are a little outside my comfort zone might take me a little bit longer to read, but I think overall they keep me engaged in reading. They help me avoid sort of slumps and stagnation. Sometimes I will go out of my way to try and find a book that's a little out of my comfort zone, that's a bit different to what I would normally read. But that is also part of the reason that I've chosen to subscribe to the Wild Book Box, because getting 3 secondhand books a month that are chosen with me in mind, but that almost always are books that I would never have picked up for myself. It just keeps me trying new genres and new authors, and I think that novelty adds a bit of excitement into my reading life. That does help keep the juices flowing and keep things moving. Number 4, be okay with DNFing. Now this is honestly something that I'm still not great at, but I am getting better at. And that is just giving myself permission to give up on a book if I'm really not enjoying it. Like I said, I still don't do this very often, but if I'm finding that I'm like stuck on a book, that I am miserable at the idea of picking it up, and basically I just like stop reading for a week, sometimes even more, because I'm so not looking forward to picking this book up. At some point I just have to accept that this is getting in the way of my enjoyment of reading to the point that I'm just not reading at all, and that's just not acceptable to me. And I do think there is a difference between pushing through something that's uncomfortable or unfamiliar and sort of like trudging through something that you just sort of hate or that just isn't interesting to you. And I am starting to get a better idea of where that line is for me, and I do think that saying no to books, even if I'm halfway through, has helped me avoid like some really significant slumps. And number 5, as soon as you finish a book, start a new one. This is probably the other really big one for me, and this is all about momentum and reducing the amount of decisions I have to make that get in the way of reading. And of course, this isn't always possible, and there are some books where I feel like I need to allow myself a bit of space before diving right into the next one. But for the most part, I have found it very, very helpful to just dive straight into the next book, even if I'm just reading a couple of pages or the introduction, as soon as I finish my last book. And the reason for this is it just eliminates that decision-making process the next time I find myself with just 15 minutes or half an hour to read. Rather than realizing I have 15 minutes and then having to go to my bookshelf and figure out what I want to read, instead it's just like an automatic, well, I have 15 minutes to read, let me pick up my book. It just removes any opportunity for me to justify jumping on Instagram or like any decision paralysis or procrastination. I think this is especially true for audiobooks, because when I listen to audiobooks is usually when I'm doing some housework or when I'm going for a walk. And so when I'm about to do one of those things, if I pull out my phone, put on my headphones, if before I head out the door I have to kind of sit down and think about what audiobook I want to listen to, what service I'm going to get it from, where to download it, I'm probably just going to put some music on, let's be real. And I love strutting along to BTS as much as the next person. But if I want to be listening to audiobooks and I want to be reading more, then eliminating that sort of decision-making process at the moment where I could just be pressing play is really important. Because if I have an audiobook queued up and ready to go, it's so much easier to make that choice and just hit play. So upon reflection, I think those are the 5 big things that I've really changed in terms of how I approach my reading that have enabled me to read so much more this year. And I'm honestly not a super fast reader. I think my average is about 35 pages per hour, which isn't like super slow, but it's definitely not speed reading. And I don't necessarily want to become a speed reader. For me, reading more is all about reading smart, I guess. So much of it is about mixing things up so that I can maintain momentum and that I can read more often. And then the other really big part, I think, is incorporating different types of reading, and that includes audiobooks and also reading things like manga and poetry that not only are often quicker to get through, but more to the point, they sort of engage a different part of my reading brain, which can be useful in avoiding fatigue if you have a whole day that you want to be reading, but also just maintaining interest and focus. Because sometimes if you're midway through a really intense, dense non-fiction, you know, you just need a bit of a break from it. So a manga or a book of poetry can be the perfect antidote to any potential boredom or slump. Of course, I'm aware that not all of these tips will work for everybody. We're all different with very different circumstances and different needs and desires as readers. But I do hope in sharing some of what has worked for me, you might find 1 or 2 things that work for you. And I would especially love to hear in the comments below if you have any tips of your own that have really worked for you. A big thank you to everybody over on my Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support, and a big extra special thank you goes to Tracy Timmerman, Laurie, Lynette Brown, and the Hales K. And thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to talk to you in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. So much love. Bye.